Hi everybody, this is Marina. I am Director of Data Engineering at Jellyvision. I like to call myself a product-first engineering leader because I like to put the value of technology above and at the foremost of the business while capturing business and user value. I like to call myself an innovator. I love innovation and using cutting-edge technology to make my solutions better. I'm a speaker and I'm speaking here today at CHIWITCON, which I'm super excited about, and I'll be speaking at other conferences as well. And recently I've become a coach for professionals and entrepreneurs. Like I said, I'm a speaker and I spoke at CHIWITCON last year. For you that remember me, I talked a lot and I talked a lot about me and my accomplishment for the year before and what I was up to. And I am super excited, like I said, to be back this year. I love this conference and I thank you for being here and thank you for being present in this moment. So here I am at my house. The times are what they are. And as I was talking to the staff at CHIWITCON, amazing staff and really prepared, we were really talking about my talk, which I submitted as the 10 things I wish I knew as a woman in tech. But here's the thing, once 2020 hit, this was almost at the beginning of the year. So once 2020, the real 2020 hit and social issues came to mind, as well as COVID-19 and, other environmental issues and things like that. I really wanted to think about the content of this talk and making sure that it was relevant for the context in which we are all here aware of nowadays. Now, I'm not going to go into detail into my experience of what this has been like, but I wanted to make sure that obviously affected my talk. And talking to them and talking to the staff and understanding this concept, I want to reframe a little bit my talk. And instead of calling it the 10 things I wish I knew as a woman in tech, I think what is best to talk about is the 10 things I have learned about women in tech. And part of this is the fact that I recently started a podcast or a web series, whatever you want to call it, in which I am interviewing the only 40 female CTOs I could find in the Chicagoland area, and in Chicago specifically, over several hundred plus CTOs. These conversations are now live online and on YouTube. And I just encourage us to go check them out if you're interested in it. I've learned so much from them, but also I've learned so much from the history of these women. And so my purpose of this talk is really to reintroduce it to somebody you know extremely well. This person is particularly now the most relevant person to me, is a female in technology. And I hope that we can both learn something from this talk, something new. We're going to talk about her history, we're going to talk about her present, and we're going to talk about the future we wish to design for this woman. And this woman I called the digital female. Enjoy. Hey, here we are. All right, so I'm talking about the digital female or the digital woman. So who is she? Who was she? What was her history? So I don't know if you know this, but around 1960, the workforce made up of females was about, in computer science and math, was about 27%. That went up to about 37% in the 80s, and then drastically decreased about 30% in the 90s and beyond. So a little bit of a history about that. We wanted to make sure we explore the history of the female in computer science and engineering concept, why that happened. So we're going to cover 3 main topics, and then we're going to refer back to that in the present moment and how maybe that has affected us. So first, I want to talk about, what was the difference in level of preparation for entry-level position. The second thing is what was the opportunity for ascension and management in the workplace once you enter the workplace. And then the third thing we're going to compare is around the role of females around motherhood and community building and so forth. So like I was saying, there was a drastic drop in the 90s, and the drop continues well into the 2000s of female participation in the workforce in computer science and mathematics. But what was happening in the past? So in the beginning, when computers started, actually, studies found that females were not biologically inferior to men when it came to math and science related studies. In fact, because female has strengths like thinking logically from taking philosophy class, linguistic class, grammar classes, and they were very much detail oriented, they were actually doing better in entry-level programming roles than some of the males. And so the market saturated actually with females entering what is called a programmer. So much so that an article came out around female wanting to be programmer that said, if you like to cook with a cookbook, then you're definitely good for programming. And programmers was actually one of the first career choice for females. At the time, they would make about $20,000 a year, which is an equivalent of about $150,000 today. Imagine that, how amazing. And they were jobs that were not easy, right? And we'll go into that in a little bit later. But the jobs were not easy. In fact, they did not have Google to search for solutions. They had to use their brain from scratch to make computers work. And so the role of the males in tech and computer science at that time was more towards the hardware. Hardware was the fancy job, and then software was taken on by females programmers, and that were the mathematicians and the number crunching roles, and then making sure that the computer was doing the problems in an accurate order and manner. So women were really prone in this job and really participating in the programmers workforce, so much so, like I said, it made about 37% of the workforce. And at some companies, female programmers were 50-50 comparatively to males in the United States. During the 80s, between those periods where women were really prevalent in programming, was also interesting fact when the term soccer mom was invented. And I think it has some type of correlation into what happens next. But something happened in the 90s, and that number dropped drastically. Well, the theory says that, or some articles and studies say that the reason of this was because the personal computer was introduced in the early 90s. And most families purchased personal computers for men. And so when I talk about the degree of preparation needed in order to enter the computer science field, once the 90s hit, it became drastically different. Pre-90s, you needed zero preparation. You could walk up into a building and say, I would like to be a programmer, with zero experience and knowledge of programming, and get a job in programming as a programmer. Now, once the personal computer was introduced, and these computers were purchased mostly for boys to play with because they advertised games, and those were marketing and targeted to boys. Males went into the universities and into workforce already having some knowledge, if not like a lot of more knowledge than females when entering the field. And so all of a sudden the level of preparation needed in order to even enter the field was much higher. This is when the idea of the technical nerd started, and this is where the idea of spending 24 hours on the computer started. Now, as females, we're quite smart. We're like, there's no way I'm going to spend 24 hours in front of a computer. This is not the job I want. And I don't think it's a job that anyone should want, not even the males. And I think there's definitely a lot to be analyzed there of why males feel like it is okay for them to spend 24/7 in front of a computer or dedicated to their job. And more kudos to the people who do that. But definitely, there should be some type of balance to life in which it's not necessarily only work, and that shouldn't definitely be a requirement in order to enter a field like computer science or engineering. So while women were prevalent in the jobs, right, comparing, they had very similar challenges even compared with today. So, while, there were programmers and they were very smart, there were very little companies that were willing to put females in charge of men. And so really the potential for ascension in management positions or, in the company were very, very, very dim. So based on the research that I found, women were exiting the workforce for computer science, even though they were prevalent, because simply they would see people ascending just because of their culture fit. This is also when the term culture fit started coming up in corporate America. And basically in the beginning, what that really meant was a biological fit. Like if you did not fit this biological traits, then really you should not ascend into greater positions of responsibilities. And so again, this job entailed long hours. They had very little opportunity for ascension. Sounds familiar? They were often harassed at the workforce because, again, of the male prevalence in the work, and even if it was not necessarily in computer science, but it was definitely across other positions of power. And so it was really hard for women to stay in the workforce. Same thing that happens today. And definitely like being able to get all the benefits of this field. My third point here is about, creating a community and a family. And so with all the time spent at the work, and remember also one thing, earlier in the 80s and 70s, it was much easier to have a one-income family and actually have a good life. So part of the decision for women to stay home and take breaks and stay with the kids, but also the fact that we could have a better life or a good life in America with only one income usually generated by the male. And so women decided to take a step back to either take care of their community, their parents, their families, and also to create families and have kids, which was made kind of hard and impossible by corporations at that time that did not employ part-time worker or mothers who exited the workforce and then re-entered the workforce. So here's the thing though, we developed some crazy strengths from this era. And I do not want to take that for granted for one bit. First, I want to say, again, this is not a biology issue. Women were amazing problem solvers when the comparative information given to female and men was the same, meaning zero. When both gender had zero knowledge and experience into programming, women excelled at the job. And in fact, companies were seeking females to solve these problems. Another strength that we developed by exiting these fields are definitely caring for others. We dominated fields like education, psychology, languages, communication, art, and biology. So we really focused as the female digital group into those skills. And this is why we're often boxed into roles that utilize those skills more than other skills, more of the hard, what they call the hard science skills. But make not mistake, this is by training and not by nature. All right, so at this point, we're playing to our strengths, we're getting in the field, and most recently we've have plenty of diversity inclusion effort to get back into the game of computer science. We're playing the game. We're playing the game we're given, right? We're playing the game of being in the workforce with men, having to deal with harassment of all kinds, having to deal with prejudice, understanding that our strengths are not equal, and bringing ourselves to the workforce in spite of all of the challenges we have ahead of us. And then boom, something happens. Call it COVID-20 or 2020 or COVID-19 or whatever you want to call it. And here's how things have changed a little bit for us. And I think that this is why it's critical. So first, all of a sudden, a lot of women have been realizing that they're working double shift or triple shifts. What that means is basically that all of a sudden, as kids are staying home from school and women are also taking on full-time job, we have 2, 3 full-time jobs that we have to take on, or we feel like we have to take on. And so we are working full-time, we're taking care of our children and their education, and we're doing anything extra that we usually have done, like this conference, right? And we're doing anything extra beyond that, right? Like taking care of ourselves and making sure we stay healthy and not drive ourselves crazy. Second, another thing that it was super interesting to me is like everything when used to be 3D, and where all of our strengths were really, really strong in a 3D world, like our social skills, communication skills, reading people, managing people, and all that good stuff, now of the sudden have dissipated into this 2D world that does not make justice to what our strengths are. And really, we should do something about it, but that's beyond the point. It really... we have to really think about how to utilize these skills in a new digital environment. Another thing I would say is that we are also in charge of being social justice leaders at our work, which means that we have to be aware of the social issues that are happening, and we feel that we have to have some type of representations in some sort of way, whatever that way is, whether it's activism or not, into these new social justices, because we care, because it's the right thing to do, right? All right. So what now? What do we want to be, and who do we want to turn into? What I'm trying to say here is that we have a key opportunity in this moment to potentially turn our cards around, or start to turn the cards around towards something better. And not only something better for us, but something better for our partners, the males that we work with, our male partners, and our children, honestly. And the children of others, our communities. So what is this digital woman, this digital female, and how can she affect the future, right? So here's where I come from, and here's where I think, right? One, we gather. We're really good at that. We're at conferences, we talk to each other, we create Facebook groups, we go to Facebook Marketplace, we buy things, we drive economy. Let's use our powers to continue to grow the community of females and women all over the world, honestly, now that we have the connection and the connectivity, and into representation of computer science and engineering skills, right? So we gather. The second thing I briefly touched on is representation and equality. Well, we want to hold ourselves equal to our counterparts. We don't want to be equal to them. And here's what I mean by that. I fundamentally believe that everyone is individually different, right? But there are definitely characteristics that are more, say, female energy, if you want to call them, and male energy, right? And while we want to be in the game in order to change the game and becoming a game changer, we cannot sustain a game that was not meant for us in the first place, right? So once we get a seat at the table, I urge you to please make sure that you're changing the game while you're there. So we want to hold ourselves equal at that table. We get a seat at the table, but we're not equal. We bring different skills. We bring different facets of our life. We bring different backgrounds. We bring different strengths and different consciousness, honestly, to that table that it's urgently needed. And then the last thing I would say, and I think perhaps is the hardest thing to do, or the hardest thing to say here, is that we need to get trained, honestly. So if we look at like the percent of women that graduate which majors, still a very low percent are in those hard sciences. We need more female representation in those skills, which are science, business, entrepreneurship, math, stats, architecture, computer science and engineering. We need to encourage our community to grow our female representation in those areas so we can bring the balance that it's needed into those areas as well. My message is really a message about courage and abundance. And I want to leave you with this prophecy that I got from a book I read. It's a prophecy of the eagle and the condor. And it goes something like this. At the beginning of time, there was one person, one type of person. And then at some point, this person divided into two types of development. The group of the eagle developed and got great skills into hard sciences and materialistic development, into knowledge and technology, into development of things like agriculture and transportation. The problem is that they remain disconnected with their spiritual side. The people of the condor, on the other hand, were great spiritual connectors, were community builders, and were really strong in their spirituality. But they did not develop their material skills needed to succeed into the material war created by the people of the eagle. Well, the prophecy says that at some point, these two groups will need each other and reunite each other to create a new balance. And this balance is really what I want us to bring to a table that is mostly created by people of the eagle right now. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed.